That was lovely, Jane. Because I used to play the piano a lot in other churches, I have to ask, who's the composer?
Grieg.
Grieg. I would not have guessed. Okay.
It didn't get into the program.
I noticed. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to our service. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We are the Rogue Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, or RUF, in Ashland, Oregon. My name is Donna Barrett, and I'm a part of RUF because of our 7 principles. We know that they've been revised, but many churches, many fellowships hang on to the 7 with love. With love. We have no creed. Some of us are agnostic, some of us are atheists, and some believe in God or something larger than ourselves. Well, we are happy to welcome you to our service, both online and in person. We want to especially thank the members of the stream team who are helping make the online service happen, and the members of the neighborhood team who welcome the on-site congregation and provide coffee hour. We invite you to sign up for our mailing list on rvuuf.org. You will receive a weekly email that gives you all the information you need to make your decision about whether you'd like to join us on Sunday on site or online. You will also learn about other great things here at RUF. We're glad you are with us for this service, and we invite you to join us in our mission, embracing diversity, empowering connection, and engaging in the work. Our speaker has a lot to share with us, so some items in the order of service, including the reading by James, have been changed. We will hear from James 2 weeks from today, and we look forward to hearing what he has to say. We begin each service by acknowledging that our building is built on land that began as the home of the Cow Creek Umpqua, Takelma, Shasta, and Lagawa people. We remind ourselves that Indigenous people are part of our communities and continue to experience the effects of colonization. We are committed to fighting for the worth and dignity of Indigenous people, both in our community and around the world. These services are part of that work. Welcome, and thank you for being with us. On the first Sunday of every month, we collect donations of food and financial gifts for the Ashland Community Food Bank. The food bank has been a part of our community for over 40 years, providing food to those in need. The need continues to grow, so we invite you to come forward with your gifts at this time, knowing your generosity makes a real difference in our community.
Good morning. My name is Merak Milligan, and I would like to add my welcome to Donna's. I'm so glad you've made time to be here with us. We light our chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism, with words by Lisa Garcia Simpson. In these wild, historic, and uncertain times, we gather to remember who we are, who we belong to, and what we are called to do. As we light this chalice, we kindle the spirit of the Great Turning, the movement for justice alive in this nation today. May we feel it in our bones, and in the stillness of this hour, may we sense it calling our name.
Okay, I haven't done this in a while. And, oh, good. New candle. Technical difficulties.
Well, she's
Carry
finishing up.
on.
Well, she's finishing up with that. Let's get started with our opening hymn this morning in your gray hymnal number 174. I think this is probably a new tune. I must warn you, it's not the most cheerful, but it's pretty accurate and it's very apropos for today. So please rise and body your spirit, and Jane will give us an introduction. Do that very often. Sorry.
Good morning. I'm Rosalie Wolf, and I'm here representing the Roof Anti-Racism team. The following words by the Unitarian Universalist Association are taken from the Spring-Summer 2025 issue of UU World, first shared with the UU community on November 6th after the election. Quote, "So we pause, we breathe, we hold one another close, and we ask, how will Unitarian Universalism meet this moment? Who are we called to be? Now, as it has always been, the unwavering love at the center of our faith is our greatest balm, our strongest shield, and our fiercest power. That animating core of love will both demand our rigorous action and offer us the wellspring of hope and courage that will equip us for that work in the times ahead. Beloveds, we will hold our fear together. We will honor our rage and devastation and grief. We will hold one another ferociously, tenderly, faithfully, and then we will move deliberately. We will invest in trust. We will claim joy, rest, and sustenance. We will resist en masse. We will fight fascism and continue the struggle for democracy. We will continue to build our movements for justice. We will focus our efforts and abandon distractions. We will create safe harbor for those in danger. We will leverage our resources. We will sharpen our skills and our analysis. We will act as if no person is disposable. We will refuse the politics of division and despair. We will seek the wisdom of elders and of history. We will weave deeper connections with our neighbors. We will fight for our survival. And we will create the conditions of possibility for our thriving and liberation. May it be so.
It is our practice each time we gather to light a candle for peace. We take this moment to call to mind our commitment to peace of mind, peace in our homes, peace in our communities, and peace in the world. Today's words are from Swami Brahmananda. In truth, to attain to interior peace, one must be willing to pass through the contrary to peace. I'm going to say it again. In truth, to attain to interior peace, one must be willing to pass through the contrary to peace.
Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom.
That we changed. So we're going to jump right into our centering song this morning in your teal hymnal, number 1011. You can stay seated. We're going to do Return Again, which most of you know. And the way it works is after the second line, you'll see this little bar and a number 1. That means go back to the beginning. And so then we start again, and this time, instead of singing the little bracketed number 1, you skip to the second ending. Then we go on, and we sing Return to Who You Are, and we sing those 2 lines twice, and then we're done. You got it? Okay, here we go. from the very beginning. I'll give you cues. Ready and
Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul.
beginning.
Return again, return again, return to the home
Second, Andy.
of your soul.
Number 2.
Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again.
Number 2.
Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again.
Some of you may know the local naturalist and writer Pepper Trail. He has a long friendship with Charles Darwin, and the two of them arranged a vacation house exchange this summer. So while Pepper is staying at Darwin's down house in England, Darwin is here in Ashland and kindly agreed to speak with us today.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to you all. It is a great pleasure to be back here in a Unitarian chapel. Some of you may know that my family was Unitarian. The Wedgwoods, my dear wife's family, were Unitarians, and I attended the Shrewsbury Unitarian Chapel as a boy. So it is a great pleasure to be back again. And I also must apologize to James for deferring his presentation, but perhaps you can understand that a reminder of the American Revolution is an ambiguous celebration for myself. So I appreciate your tact. Well, thank you all for coming, and as you may know, I'm not given to public speaking. I leave that to my defenders. So I apologize in advance for not exactly what you expected. My talk today will offer reminiscences of my early life, of my voyage on the HMS Beagle, and of the years leading up to 1859 to trace how I came to develop my concept of evolution and to write my book, The Origin of Species. I'm afraid that my mind is rather dull and methodical, and if left to myself, I would simply start with my birth and so on. But my brother Erasmus and my dear wife Emma insist that I try to be amusing. And so they've encouraged me to begin with this list that I wrote in 1838, when I was trying to decide whether or not to marry. Emma says it is very characteristic. So here you can see a page from my notebook. Perhaps you can make out on the left side, at the top it says marry. On the right side it says not marry. And I made a very precise list. Under marry, I wrote children, if it please God, a constant companion and friend in old age, better than a dog anyhow. Charms of music and female chit-chat, these things good for one's health, but terrible loss of time. Under not marry, I wrote freedom to go where one likes, conversation of clever men at clubs, not forced to bend in every trifle or to have the expense and anxiety of children, perhaps quarreling, cannot read in the evenings, less money for books. However, in the end, I decided, by God, it is intolerable to think of spending one's whole life working, and nothing after all. Only picture to yourself a nice, soft wife on a sofa with a good fire and books and music perhaps. And at the bottom I wrote, QED, Mary, Mary, Mary. Well, I was born, I will return to my biography briefly, and I was born on the 12th of February, 1809, which is the very same day as your great American president, Abraham Lincoln. This is a portrait of myself as a 7-year-old boy, and I grew up in Shropshire in Shrewsbury. My father, Robert Waring Darwin, was a prosperous physician with a good head for business. My mother was the daughter of Josiah Wedgwood of the great pottery concern. I grew up very comfortably, and my grandfather was Erasmus Darwin, the famous scientific poet or poetical scientist. And of course, he was well known to me, and his ideas about evolution and the transmutation of life were very influential in my later work. I was not an outstanding student, especially Latin and Greek were a very great challenge to me, and my father rather despaired of my academic achievements, so he decided to send me to Edinburgh to study medicine with my brother Erasmus, who was there, at age 16. But I found I had no stomach for dissection, and I began to take courses in natural history and spent much of my time hunting for grouse in the Highlands. This did not please my father, so he removed me from Edinburgh and sent me to Cambridge, theoretically to prepare for the ministry. But I had no aptitude for that either, and I spent much of my time collecting beetles. Well, at Cambridge, somehow, I attracted the attention of Professor John Stevens Henslow, professor of botany, who became my mentor, and thinking that perhaps I needed some adventure and direction in my life as a rather aimless young man, he proposed me for a naturalist post on the HMS Beagle. At that time, I was on a summer break from Cambridge when the letter came in 1831. I was intending to return to Cambridge and complete my theological studies and live out my life as a curate. And the Beagle was to sail in a mere 4 weeks. And it was planned to be a 2-year voyage. I had the devil of a time convincing my father to approve of my going, but he finally relented. But then I had to convince the captain of the vessel, Captain Robert Fitzroy. Fitzroy was only 26 years old. I was 21. And Fitzroy was an ardent disciple of phrenology, and he was convinced that he could judge a man's character by his features. And he doubted whether anyone with my nose could possess sufficient energy and determination for the voyage. But I think he was afterward well satisfied that my nose had spoken falsely. So here was a portrait of myself upon my return from the Beagle voyage as a 31-year-old. Fitzroy was looking for a congenial gentleman's companion to accompany him on the voyage, in part because of his susceptibility to depression. His uncle had committed suicide, and he received his promotion to captain on the first surveying expedition of the Beagle due to the suicide of Captain Pringle Stokes. So suicide had marked his life, and I am sorry to say that Fitzroy did indeed ultimately commit suicide in 1865 after a distinguished career in the Navy and the Meteorological Office. Well, here is the HMS Beagle. It was a 90-foot long surveying vessel with 74 people aboard, which is a lot of people for a 90-foot vessel. And I shared the poop cabin, which is at the very stern of the vessel. I shared the poop cabin with 2 of the survey officers, and we strung hammocks every night, and mine was the upper hammock, and it was 2 feet from the deck above my head. So you can see it was not luxurious quarters, but for a young man seeking adventure, it was absolutely splendid. My main difficulty on the voyage of the Beagle was that, in fact, I found upon leaving Portsmouth Harbor that I was violently prone to seasickness. And I wrote this back in a letter to my sisters. I hate every wave of the ocean with a fervor which you have only seen the green waters of the shore can never imagine. I loathe, I abhor the sea and all ships which sail upon it. Not even the thrill of geology makes up for the misery and vexation of spirit that comes with seasickness. And indeed, I remained prone to seasickness throughout the entire period of the voyage, which, as I said, was planned for 2 years, but in the end lasted almost 5 years, from December of 1831 to October of 1836. However, I can say that I took some solace to the fact that I was only at sea for a total of 18 months in all of that nearly 5-year time, with the longest stretch being 47 days. The rest of the time, I was on land, conducting extensive studies of geology and natural history, especially in South America, where I had several splendid, long exploring expeditions on horseback. Well, we arrived in Tierra del Fuego in 1832, and here we were to spend a very extensive period of time surveying these complex channels at the southern tip of South America for the British Admiralty. And here I first met uncivilized man, the natives of Tierra del Fuego. I shall never forget these drawings are from our ship's artist. I shall never forget how strange and savage one group was. Four or five men suddenly appeared on a cliff near us. They were absolutely naked and with long streaming hair, springing from the ground and waving their arms about their heads. They sent forth most hideous yells. Their appearance was so strange that it was scarcely like that of earthly inhabitants. And I later wrote that without this experience in Tierra del Fuego, the experience of comparing wild natives with myself, I would never have had the breadth of vision to include mankind as an integral part of the natural world, or to have registered any form of continuity between urbane Londoners and these Fuegians that existed with only the merest semblance of civilization. Well, throughout the voyage, I was extremely attentive to geology, my first great love in the sciences, and to this I owe an inestimable debt of gratitude to this man, Charles Lyell. And I obtained his works, his 3-volume Principles Geology on the course of the voyage, and studied them assiduously. The science of geology is more indebted to Lyell than to any other man who ever lived. He proposed the idea of uniformitarianism, not to be confused with Unitarianism. Uniformitarianism was that the processes visible today, like erosion and the rise and fall of sea levels, working over great periods of time, were responsible for the geological features that we see today. No great cataclysms or Noah's floods were needed, just almost limitless time. This idea of small changes accumulating over time to produce great effects impressed me deeply and became a cornerstone of my thinking about biological change. And during my adventures on the Beagle, I was never happier than on horseback, engrossed in studying the stupendous geological wonders of South America, as you can see here. And at one point, I reached a peak of the Andes Mountains in South America, and I discovered fossils there. And I wrote back that it would be amusing to think that the sea had once lain over the top of these amazing peaks. Well, most of you probably associate my name with the Galapagos Islands, and indeed some of my most important thinking about the course of life's development were made here on these islands. And yet we only spent only a few days more than a month during that 5-year voyage in the Galapagos, but during that time, as you can see from all of these squiggly lines, we made visits to almost all of the main islands of the archipelago. And I wrote in my journals, considering the small size of these islands, we feel the more astonished at the number of their species and at their confined range. Seeing every height crowned with its crater, and the boundaries of most of the lava streams still distinct, we are led to believe that within a period geologically recent, the unbroken ocean was here spread out. I had never dreamed that islands about 50 or 60 miles apart, and most of them in sight of each other, formed of precisely the same rocks, placed under a quite similar climate, rising to a nearly equal height, would be so differently tenanted. Well, I'm rather embarrassed to confess that the full significance of what I saw on the Galapagos did not become clear to me until years later, working over my notes and collections back in England. Indeed, I labeled some of my specimens so carelessly that in many cases it was impossible to be sure from which island they came. This was particularly true with those birds that have come to be known as Darwin's finches. In my notes, I did not recognize that these birds were all related, instead classifying them as belonging to 4 different groups: the grosbeaks, the finches, the American blackbirds, and the wrens. It was not until John Gould, the great ornithologist, analyzed the collections in 1837 that the truth was revealed. And I will say that in my experience, ornithologists are the most insightful and brilliant of all the scientists in the natural world. And Dr. Pepper Trail is perhaps a foremost example of that. So, following the correct classification of Dr. Gould, this is what I concluded. The remaining land birds form a most singular group of finches, related to each other in the structures of their beaks, short tails, form of body and plumage. There are 13 species which Mr. Gould has divided into 4 subgroups. All these groups are peculiar to the Galapagos, and as is the whole group. The most curious fact is the perfect gradation in the size of the beaks in the different species of Gyaospisa. And you can see here from the lower right, that very thick beak, all the way up to the top, that thin beak. From those as large as a half-inch to that of a half-inch, and finally to those of a warbler. And this instance of what appeared to be an original species which had been taken and modified for different ends was an extremely important example for me in my development of my theories of evolution. Well, as I said, the voyage was planned for 2 years. It lasted almost 5. And after leaving the Galapagos, we traveled across the Pacific. We stopped in Tahiti, we stopped in New Zealand, we stopped in Australia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so finally I returned to England in 1836. Now, although I was a gentleman, I did not have a university degree, having left before completion of my studies. I had no place in the scientific establishment. However, I had sent my collections back periodically during the voyage of the Beagle, and I had written some preliminary reports, and thanks to this and to my status as a gentleman, I was able to find a home at the Royal Society of London, and I came to be great friends with 3 of the leading scientists of the age: Charles Lyell, the geologist who I've mentioned, Joseph Dalton Hooker, a great botanist, and Thomas Huxley, a vertebrate anatomist and a great public speaker who became my foremost defender. So with this base of operations, I was able to devote myself to writing up the studies that had arisen from the voyage of the Beagle. Now, some of you may have heard that I was a rather slow and unproductive biologist, taking many years to develop my ideas, and there is some justification in that, as we will see, but I strongly object to the characterization of myself as lazy. In the 10 years between 1837 and 1847, I wrote 4 books, edited 19 issues of the zoology of the Beagle Voyage, revised my popular Voyage of the Beagle for the second edition, published 25 scientific papers and notes, filled 6 or 8 notebooks on the most taxing philosophical issues of the age, read an extraordinary number of books, and composed an essay on transmutation, as I called it, running to over 100 manuscript pages, but I consider this far too incomplete for publication. However, in those notebooks, you can find the seeds of my theory of evolution. And this is the most famous example from Notebook B in 1838, only 2 years after my return from the voyage. And this diagram, you can't really quite read it, but it says, thus, between A, down at the lower right, and B, at the top, there is an immense gap of relation. C and D, the finest gradation, B and D, rather greater distinction. Thus, genera could be formed. This was my first clear statement, showing that I was beginning to understand how gradual change could lead to the hierarchical relationships that we see everywhere in the natural world, that we now classify as orders and families and genera and species. This may not seem like a very startling insight to you, but I assure you, in 1838, it was quite revolutionary and became a foundation for my thinking about descent with modification and evolution. Well, at the same time, I was a young man, and young men are in need of wives, and so I was considering whether to marry. This is when I wrote my marry or not marry diagram. And I also wrote, as for a wife, that most interesting specimen in the whole series of vertebrate animals, Providence only knows whether I shall ever capture one or be able to feed her if caught. All such considerations are hidden in far in futurity, but at the end of a distant view, I sometimes see a cottage and some white object like a petticoat, which almost always drives granite and geology out of my mind in the most unphilosophical manner. Well, I did indeed find my wife, Emma Wedgwood, rather close at hand. She was, as a matter of fact, my cousin. There's nothing wrong with that. And we married January 29th, 1839. And as I said, she was an heiress to the Wedgwood pottery fortune. In 1842, we moved out of London to Kent to Down House, where Pepper is currently enjoying my hospitality. And this was a very happy home for me, surrounded by gardens and natural objects to study. So I was very happy there. But my brother Erasmus, who was a famous London wit who hated the country life, called it down in the mouth house. Well, during this period, I read an extremely important paper, the Essay on the Principle of Population, written by Thomas Malthus in 1798. And I was particularly struck by this sentence. It may safely be pronounced that the population, when unchecked, goes on doubling itself every 25 years, or increases at a geometrical rate. I wrote in my notebook, one may say that there's a force like 100,000 wedges trying to force every kind of adapted structure into the gaps in the economy of nature, or rather forming gaps by thrusting out weaker ones. The final cause of all this wedging must be to sort out proper structures and adapt it to change. Well, I also took Malthus' ideas on population to heart, and indeed, during the course of my marriage, we had 10 children. Unfortunately, 3 of them died in childhood. This is a portrait with my son, William, and my favorite of all my children was my little daughter, Anne Darwin. But tragically, Anne died in April of 1851 after a prolonged illness, probably tuberculosis, and after very many painful attempts at treatment. Her death was a terrible shock to me. I wrote, she was my favorite. Her cordiality, openness, buoyant joyousness, and strong affection made her most lovable. Poor dear little soul. And at contemplating her death and suffering, I could not reconcile this with the idea of a benevolent creator. And after that, what weak religious feelings I had were lost. As far as my feelings about a divine power in the universe, I wrote, the mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us. And I, for one, must be content to be an agnostic. After Anne's death, I threw myself with renewed determination into my exhaustive researches on the anatomy, development, and classification of the barnacles. This painstaking work took me 8 years to complete, during which time I set aside my thoughts about evolution. And this is my great monograph on the Ceropedia, or the barnacles as you call them. This was a solace to me to be engaged in such detailed and painstaking work, which remains a monument to the science of this group of animals. But I was not isolated during this time. During this period, I received over 15,000 letters from around the world, from 2,000 distinguished correspondents. But I must say that of all the many thousands of letters that I received, none had nearly the impact of a letter that I received in June of 1858 from a young naturalist in the Malay archipelago, what you now call Indonesia, named Alfred Russel Wallace. This is a portrait of Wallace, and this letter contained a paper entitled, quote, on the tendency of varieties to depart indefinitely from the original type. And it began, and I quote, it is the object of the present paper to show that there is a general principle in nature which will cause many varieties to survive the parent species and to give rise to successive variations departing further and further from the original type. Well, this was a tremendous shock to me. This idea had apparently come to Wallace as he was suffering from a fit of malaria. As he was lying in that fit, he later wrote, it suddenly flashed upon me that this self-acting process would necessarily improve the race, because every generation, the inferior would inevitably be killed off, and the superior would remain. That is, the fittest would survive. I waited anxiously for the termination of my fits that I might at once make notes for a paper on the subject. And this was the paper that I received. Well, this was a tremendous shock. Here, in a short, well-written paper, was the very crux of my years, indeed decades, of thinking about the process, which I called evolution. And I had always, as you can see, I had always thought that it was very possible that I might be forestalled, or as you would say now, scooped. But I fancied that I had grand enough soul not to care. But I found myself mistaken and punished. And this letter had actually arrived at a most difficult time. The day after I received it, my 15-year-old daughter Henrietta came down with scarlet fever. And the following day, baby Charles, who was only 19 months old, was also stricken. Distracted as I was, I determined that the only honorable course was to forward young Mr. Wallace's paper, unchanged, for publication. However, my friends Huxley, Lyell, and Hooker would not hear of it, reminding me of my 20 years of painstaking accumulation of evidence for the transmutation of species, that is, evolution, and in the end, I agreed with their proposal that they present a joint paper under the authorship of both myself and Wallace at the next meeting of the Linnaean Society. And my son Charles died of scarlet fever on the evening of June 28th. Lyell and Hooker presented the paper 2 days later on July 1st in my absence. And this is the paper with a characteristically short and pithy title, On the Tendency of Species to Form Varieties and on the Perpetuation of Varieties and Species by Natural Means of Selection, by Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace. This paper was read to an audience smaller than the one that is gathered here today, only about 30 people, and did not actually create much of a stir at the time. But as we shall see, it became the kernel of a great work. After the funeral of baby Charles, I took Emma and the 7 children away from the unhealthy atmosphere of Down House to the Isle of Wight. And there, at the prodding of my friend Hooker, I began to work on a proper summary of my ideas about evolution, and I was engaged in that without pause until May of 1859, when the 500-page manuscript was complete, and then I was engaged in the wretched work of proofreading and editing until October of 1859. In all, the writing process took me 13 months and 10 days, and I wrote at the time, "My abominable volume has cost me so much labor that I almost hate it." And here it is, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, and it was published in November of 1859. I must say that it was quite a success, with the first edition selling out in short order and reviews in all the major periodicals. I eventually collected 347 reviews and over 1,500 general articles about the origin of species, as well as 2 heavy volumes of newspaper articles. I confess I really became quite sick of reading about myself. However, all the publicity was not equally agreeable, and there were numerous distasteful caricatures of me in the popular press, lampooning my ideas that humanity might be related to the apes, and this was all very distasteful to me, and I withdrew further into my scientific isolation at Down House. However, the public demanded a great confrontation, and in June of 1860, there's a great tradition at Oxford called the Great Debate. These were held every year with a different topic each year. And in 1860, the topic was the origin of species. And the 2 debaters were Bishop Samuel Wilberforce, the Bishop of Oxford, and my great friend, the anatomist and debater Thomas Huxley, defending my side. I was not in attendance. A number of other defenders and deniers of evolution were in attendance, including my old captain, Robert Fitzroy, who is now an admiral and who had become very religious. And he stated, quote, "Had I known then what I know now, I would never have taken him aboard the Beagle." Well, Bishop Wilberforce was a famous debater. He was so slippery in debate that his nickname was Soapy Sam. And the debate went back and forth with each side scoring particular points until, perhaps a little overconfident, Bishop Wilberforce made this statement. "Tell me, Mr. Huxley, do you claim ape ancestry on your grandmother's side or your grandfather's?" Well, he thought he had scored a great witty point, but Huxley, quick as ginger, came back at him. "If I would rather have a miserable ape for a grandfather or a man, highly endowed by nature and possessed of great means and influence, and yet who employs these faculties for the mere purpose of introducing ridicule into a grave scientific discussion, I unhesitatingly affirm my preference for the ape." Well, the undergraduates in the audience went mad. They flung their hats in the air, they stamped their feet, and it was generally acknowledged that Huxley and evolution had won the day. Well, after that, I went on to publish many more books, of course, but still, The Origin of Species is the one that I am most known for. And I would like to conclude my talk, and thank you very much for your patience, with this passage, which is the end of the origin of species, forms the very end. It is interesting to contemplate a tangled bank, clothed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing in the bushes, with various insects flitting about, and with worms crawling through the damp earth, and to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other, and dependent upon each other in so complex a manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us. Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone circling on according to the fixed law of gravity from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You can close this down.
Thank you very much, Darwin. He has graciously agreed after the service to participate in a question and answer session in the library, if you'd like to ask any questions. Each week, we take an offering to support this congregation. Your generosity in giving is the biggest source of financial support for the missions, programs, services, outreach, and staff here at Roof. Your giving makes it possible to put our principles and values into action in our community and beyond. We are grateful for all the ways you support our community. If you are joining us online, you will soon see instructions for giving on your screen. If you are in the Great Hall, you can place your gift in the offering baskets we will soon pass, or use the QR code on the back of the order of worship to give electronically. If you need support, please contact our minister using the form on roof.org. We'll get back to you as soon as possible to find out more. We will now give and receive our morning offering.
Closing hymn this morning is number 163 in your gray hymnal. For the earth forever turning. Please rise in body or spirit. Let's sing just the first and the last verse.
We extinguish our chalice with words from Heather Christensen. Each week as we gather, we light a common chalice. We sing and celebrate, we pray and think. Then we each gather strength from the flame and go out from here, taking the light with us.